All right, so we're going to continue from where we left off last week in our study of the mitzvah of Teshuva. So let me give you this. Just to recap, by the way, this is our last class of the year. You saw what I did there? You saw that?
Yep.
Okay, just, it's like, always like, oh, see you next year.
It's today.
No, not today, but we had to start. And you know what inspired me, by the way? One of the things that inspired me was when you said maps.
Your maps are like
When you said maps and Joshua are like, pretty good, right? So we're going to be like Dora the Explorer. I'm the map. Just shows you how old my kids are. Anyway, so we discussed the categorization of mitzvos in general. You have fully obligatory mitzvos, or you have mitzvos that are what you think we use the word situational. If you find yourself in a certain scenario, then you have to fulfill it a certain way. So if that's the case, what is the status of the mitzvah of Teshuva? Is Teshuva a mitzvah? And if it is it the kind of thing where I have to repent, or if I choose to repent, then this is how you do it. Okay. Let me just, while we're in that mode, and this is a great question to ask yourself, this is also a great question to ask, let's say at a Shabbos table, or especially at a Rosh Hashanah table, if you're talking about Teshuva, if the theme of the day is Teshuva. So the theme of Rosh Hashanah, of course, is shofar. Not a lot of Teshuva on Rosh Hashanah, really, even though we talk about Teshuva, but there's none of this. And, there's no like, oh, I sinned. Some people even take out Chatanu in Avinu Malkeinu. We don't say that one. That's not right. I want to say Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu L'fanecha. Some people skip it. No, Rosh Hashanah is all about, like, I recognize who the boss is. Malchios, Zichron, Shofars, etc. Only want to get to Asar Yismei Teshuva and Yom Kippur. That's when I start with this. But there's no Ashamnu, Bagadnu. There's none of that on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a very happy, exciting, lofty day, but yet it is Teshuva. So the mitzvah day is shofar. What's the first thing we do before we blow the shofar, besides saying the paragraph 7 times, and nobody really says 7 times, is we make a bracha. If Teshuva is a mitzvah, why don't we make a bracha? You ever thought about that? You ever wondered about that? Keeps me up at night. Why do we not? Asher Kitchanis myself, Sivano, Al, too broad. Okay. So can you think of something else that maybe is too broad, that maybe you think like should have a mitzvah but doesn't? Should have a is that what I said? Mitzvah, yeah. Should have a bracha but doesn't. What? So what you don't realize is that you just answered the question by asking that. I missed having your genius here in our presence, right? The one of the answers that's given is that because I don't know, like when it starts, it stops, or in other words, is there a formal act of Teshuva? According to the Rambam, we're saying, yeah, there is that when you say vidui. But let's say I just kind of like, I just did you. I just felt bad. I felt bad for something I just did. So maybe because there's no formal act, or because it's something that's called Dvarim Shebelev, it's really only internal. Maybe that's why there's no bracha, right? So this is the question that's asked for other mitzvos will help answer. Is another one of the answers why there's no bracha on Teshuva. So, for instance, one of the greatest mitzvahs that we have all the time is the mitzvah of tzedakah. How come there's no bracha on the mitzvah of tzedakah?
Ongoing, should be constant.
Is it? Does that mean you have to give everything away?
No.
No, so you eat every day and you make a bracha every day. You could do every time you stop it. You could do it.
Right. Right. No. Right. Why not? So I think what you meant to say is that because there's no end to it, right? It's sort of limitless. That's one of the reasons given. Or an interesting reason that's given is it's possible that what if the recipient doesn't receive it?
Oh, interesting.
If you give
contingent on them.
Correct. Let's say you just give aimlessly, or let's say you give to somebody, I don't want it. I've had many people refuse tzedakah, believe it or not, because Usually they're the professional collectors. They don't like what you give them. But that's a whole story for another time. My favorite, we have a way to deal with like people who come into the shul. Like we have a whole system of how we deal with it. They come a lot. People come into the, they come to collect. It happens all the time. So I have a rule here when we're davening. First of all, we play this funny game. Like we're sitting in this room. I don't sit like against the wall facing everybody. I sit with everybody else. Okay. And I sit, facing forward at the table like everybody else. So when they come in, they do this funny thing of trying to figure out who the rabbi is, right? So we have I'm never the first guest, which is great. I love it. Yeah. So poor Rabbi Bernstein. I brought him on, I can go to him. So I have a rule that there's a whole racket, fine. But if they come and they daven with us, you come on time and you daven with us, I'll say something to you afterwards. But you cannot collect during davening. Absolutely, b'shum ofen. Can't disturb everybody's davening, and you can't just show up and say, "Oh, I'm going to say something." It doesn't work like that. So when I was in Long Island, I remember once we were making one of our like a simchat bad party for one of the girls. I don't know which one. It was a Sunday morning, whatever, and I'm outside greeting all the guests as they're coming in. And Mishulachim come in and they say, I'm sorry, this is not a good time. This is a private event. No, the rabbi told me I should come today. This guy says to my face. I'm like, oh, really? What was his name? Yeah. So that's all kinds of shtick. But yeah. And so the mitzvah of tzedakah, which is also maybe the reason why there's no mitzvah on the, I mean bracha. There's no bracha on the mitzvah of mishloach manos. They give shalach manos also because it's contingent on the recipient. So we have all these different types of things. Or so maybe you even argue what if your tshuva is not accepted? Right. But the main thing is that probably because it's not defined by a specific act. There's no mitzvah, for instance, when you build the sukkah, because there's no mitzvah to build the sukkah. The mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. That's why we make the bracha of leishev basukah. That's why you can't have a beard on sukkahs, because it says leishev basukah. Not everyone, but a lot of them do. A lot of them, yeah. That's a good question.
Are there other mitzvahs that you could potentially do wrong? Like if you eat an apple, you eat an apple, you make a bracha.
So that's not a mitzvah. That's a different type of bracha.
Bracha is
correct, but let's say asher kidshana mitzvahs. Not like there's something called a brachas anenin. Like when you're gonna drink your zero Snapple, same different name, same taste, Snapple. Okay, a bracha on that. The bracha there serves as what's called a matir. That's what allows you to partake of God's bounty in this world with permission. Brachas mitzvah is where you're saying, "Oh, you know what? I am commanded to do something." That's why I say asher kidshana mitzvasav v'tzivanu. We are sanctified with Hashem's mitzvahs, and God commanded us to do X, Y, and Z. Right? So think about where using that formula. It's an excellent question. Is there a bracha on every mitzvah? The answer is like everything you ask me is it depends. Okay, so there's a mitzvah al achilas matzah, lishmoa kol shofar, leishev basukah, al natilas lulav. Even on rabbinic mitzvahs, lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, al mikra megillah, which are rabbinic mitzvahs, and we still say asher kedushav v'sav v'tzivanu. That's a whole other question. How can you say v'tzivanu if it's only rabbinic? Okay, but if you think of the ones that, is there a mitzvah that says asher kishanu v'sav v'tzivanu lechabed es av v'im, to honor your father and mother? Right, it's limit. It is, because even after they're gone, it doesn't end.
It's on a loophole. It's one of the 10 commandments.
Yeah, and even so, no bracha.
Why?
Probably because it's the same thing like tzedakah. Like it's not.
But are there other
It's
mitzvahs that are not limitless that don't have bracha?
Well, let's think about it.
But besides being limitless, like you could do it wrong.
Yeah.
But that doesn't
Right.
You could do tshuva.
Well, no, that's not true. Not true.
Wrong.
It's a problem. Let's say you pick up a lulav and an esrog, and you make the bracha al natilas lulav, and it turns out that you only had 3 out of the 4, or the esrog was a lemon. Literally.
That was what I was.
Right. So what happens then? So first of all, it's not. I don't know if it's a bracha levatala. It was a mistaken bracha. Intent has a lot to do with it. The question is when you take a proper lulav and esrog, do you have to make the bracha again? The answer is yes, because you didn't do it correctly the first time.
That's assuming you didn't figure out that you did.
Right. There's no bracha on davening. If you say that davening is a mitzvah, but let's say Kriya Shema is a mitzvah. So are those blessings that we say in davening really a bracha on Kriya Shema? I don't know. The classic example of this is the best, I love this, is getting married. Is getting married a mitzvah?
No, but Puruvu is.
There's no bracha on that.
And it's a commandment.
Yeah. So why? Right. So getting married is building the sukkah. It's what's called a hechsher mitzvah. It's a preparatory step towards the fulfillment of sitting in the sukkah or having children. You know what I mean? So but yet, Puruvu does not have a bracha, but a wedding does. You have 7 of them, and you have the one in the beginning. So there, the Gemara and the Rishonim, they debate what is the nature of that bracha. There's a third secret category of bracha. There's what's called brachas hananin. You have brachas mitzvah, and then you have what's called brachas shevach. That maybe it's just general praise that we sing.
Rainbow.
So that's probably the questionable what that would fall under. But yeah, right. So let's say shevach. But so shevach is because God, God. He gave us this, and we're supposed to like marry this one and not marry that one, right? And yet, but when he uses the formula asher kidshanu v'tzivasav v'tzivanu, that's where it gets tricky because the language in the bracha asher kidshanu v'tzivasav v'tzivanu ala rayos v'yiter lanu as right. That whole thing is v'tzivanu. So that's why the Rishonim, they like a lot of gymnastics take place. It's very important to look at the nature of mitzvahs and figure out what category do they go in. So think about something. Is there something that's not limitless, that is a regular mitzvah that does not have a bracha? I'll tell you one that is limitless, that does not have a bracha, which is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't make a bracha on the Haggadah. When we tell the story of the Exodus, which is for sure, we make a matzah. That's not a bracha. That is not a bracha. Bracha is burich ata Hashem l'kaini melech ha'olam. Asher Hashem tzvayis v'zivuni. Right, like that. There's a lot of it. Like this is a great thought exercise, and I'm telling you that at your Yontif tables or Shabbos tables, you generate a discussion like this, you'd be amazed what comes out, and people start thinking of mitzvahs left and right, right? It's really fascinating. And then somebody's going to crack out the siddur and look at all the brachas that are found in between Shacharis and Mincha. It has the pages with all the blessings on it. Like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? Really, really interesting stuff. Okay. We have. Yet there are things that are limitless that we do have a bracha on. Like every day we say Birchas Torah, a blessing on learning every day. So I don't know. Anyway, this is all part of this general conversation. So let's go down to the bottom of the first page where it says L'chaora. We'll look at the Rambam and the Ramban. We'll see them a little bit more in detail. L'chaora nira lomar sheb'inyan hazeh nechleku harishonim. So it seems that there is a machlokas. There's a dispute amongst the Rishonim. Harambam v'Haramban. Okay, the Rambam is not your Maimonides, he's my Maimonides. Okay, Ramosha ben Maimon, the codifier of Jewish law par excellence, and then the Ramban is Nachmanides. Okay, people often get the two confused for obvious reasons because there's a 1-letter difference, but it's also the accent is very, very important to say Rambam and Ramban.
There's, I don't know, you'll appreciate, I'll get along to send it to you. There's some group that makes like Tanakh skips online, and they have a whole bit about Rambam and Ramban being neighbors, one above the other.
That's Yehudim Bayim.
That's the one?
Yeah.
Seen the Chris Yamsuf?
Oh, it is.
Or the Zonah,
It is. Oh, Esther. Oh my God. Jen! I can't even say because we're being recorded now. This thing called Yehudim Bayim, you can find it on YouTube. It is so sacrilegious and awful, but so funny because you really have to understand. I mean, and it goes all the way to modern events. Okay, they show like Yigal Amir as a kid at home, like oh my God, like horrible stuff, but super funny, really clever. Yehudim Bayim, it's in Hebrew, totally in Hebrew, but it's very. Yeah. And they keep going upstairs, downstairs, like,
I'm not the Ramban.
yeah. So, but yeah, they didn't, they weren't, they have a lot of crossover, really interesting. So, Harambam biyad chazak hilchas tshuva omar bepesach devorav kol mitzvah shibatori im over adam alachas mehen kishi ya'as tshuva yosh v'chato. Right, we saw this last week, that when all the mitzvahs, if a person violates them, any of them, kishi ya'as tshuva yosh v'chato chayv lizvado shenemar his vado chatosam. Mitoch shebite harambam es mitzvahs hatshuva beloshon hishdamas. Shehi begeder mitzvahs harashus shamar kishiyas tshuva. In other words, since he's writing it, it's sort of like, if you want, you could. Then how do you do it? So the Minchas Chinuch writes, Ki harambam sover she'ein hatshuva ela begeder mitzvahs harashus. That tshuva is not an obligation upon you. If you want to engage in the process of tshuva, you can. Shem yirtze adam she'ischap ravanasav. If a person decides that he wants to have his sins atoned for, which is up to you, you could decide to go in the non-atoning route. You have to suffer the consequences or whatever it is, because then, you're going to hear your mother and your grandmother's voice in your back of your head all day long. So then, that if he wants to do tshuva, if he wants to engage in the process of atonement, then he has to do tshuva. And how do you do so? Through vidui, which is confession. And if not, he's not atoned for. But in other words, if I don't engage in tshuva, it's not like, oh, here's another matzah I didn't eat. Here's another lulav I didn't shake. Right? He says it's similar to tzitzis. He says it's even less than tzitzis. Remember, we discussed my high school tricks. If a person does not have a four-corner garment, he does not have to put on tzitzis. However, if he does put on a four-cornered beged, turn the page, then he's obligated to put on tzitzis. Ve'ilu b'Teshuva, page 142 on the top. We never find that a person comes into a status of obligation at all. Because even if he sinned, it doesn't say, oh, you sinned, oh, you must repent. This is what the Minchas Chinuch says is the Rambam. That's why it calls into the category of reshus. V'doma mitzvahs tshuva l'mitzvahs gerushin, and this is similar to what we talked about when it comes to divorce. Shakol itzuma eino lahara l'mishirotza l'garish be'ezu ofen yigarish. The Torah does not say thou shalt divorce thine wife. It says that should a marriage dissolve and you have to execute a divorce, this is how it has to be done properly. Kach mitzvahs hatshuva she'imrotza lasas tshuva morim lo ezu ofen yaseh. If a person wants to engage in the act of tshuva, how do you do it? This is how you do it through vidui. That is the Minchas Chinuch's understanding of the Rambam. The Ramban, on the other hand, let's see, it has a whole different approach. Aval Ramban, and he also says, Sforno va'od rishonim acherim da'atem acheres. Ramban, the Sforno, many other rishonim, they have a different opinion. Heim sivurim ki hatshuva hi min ha-mitzvah shebechova. They say that, no, it is an obligation to do tshuva. So normally when I have something that's an obligation, how do I know that something's an obligation? So our first inkling would be that there is a pasuk in the Torah that says you have to do it. We're coming up on Rosh Hashanah in a few days. And a week from right now, we're going to be blowing shofar. Yeah, we should be blowing shofar exactly 1 week from right now, okay? Will wake you up after I put you to sleep with my words before the shofar. That's why we blow shofar after the speech, so everybody can wake up. The Torah says, and we have it, we say it a million times, about blowing shofar in Rosh Hashanah. We have mitzvahs, we have psukim in Parshas Emor here, there. Right? We have psukim that tell us you have to blow shofar. So if that's the case, is there a pasuk that tells us that we have to do tshuva? So he says, yes, v'yesh la pasuk mefurash b'Torah. We have an pasuk, an explicit pasuk. Where is it? Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it. It's in this week's parsha, b'dvarim parak lamed, pasuk beis. V'shavta ara Hashem elokecha v'shamata b'kolo. Kechol asher anochi mitzavacha hayom. It says, v'shavta, and you shall return to Hashem your God, and you shall hearken to his voice. As well, I'm commanding you today. Not only that, and then it says further, ki ha-mitzvah hazos asher anochi mitzavacha hayom lo nifleisi mecha, etc., etc. This mitzvah, which I'm commanding to you, What mitzvah? Ki ha-mitzvah hazos. It says, for this mitzvah that I'm commanding you today. What's the mitzvah? The Ramban says, Ezu mitzvah hazos, b'forshin Ramban v'hasvarno, ki pasuk ze ola al divrei hakatzav shel pasuk beis. It refers back to the aforementioned verse.
9 seconds in between,
It's a lot of like fanfare, a lot of,
but the same topic.
Yeah,
doesn't change.
yeah, lots of fluff. Moshe's getting to the end of his speech, right? So, he's trying to circle the drain a little bit. Like, all right, land the plane. Yeah, I'm sure you get that a lot. Good job. So what is the pasuk referring to? A pasuk base, and it says, "Misham Talmud Ezuhu HaMitzvah Hazos." What is the mitzvah hazos for this mitzvah? By the way, if you look at it's beautiful psukim. The pasuk says, "Ki ha-mitzvah hazos lo nifleisi mimcha v'lo rechoka hi." For this mitzvah, this mitzvah that I am commanding you, which the Ramban and Sforno say, meaning the mitzvah of Teshuva, it's not so hard. It's not so far away that you can say, "Oh my God, who can go up to the heavens to reach it?" No, it's right here. It's not in the heavens. It's right here. Oh, who can go on the other side of the sea to get it? No, it's right here in front of you. Teshuva is accessible. Okay. What is it? For instance, is Shavta Hashem Elokecha Have Omer Zu Teshuva. Okay. So now this leaves us with it's like we're getting all Talmudic here. So this leaves us with a really good question then. I mean, that's pretty convincing, right? It's the pasuk says V'shavta, and then a little bit later it says this mitzvah. It uses the word mitzvah, which we don't even have often in the Chumash, where the Torah says, "Oh, for this mitzvah." If you don't think it's a mitzvah, then what? How do you deal with this pasuk? Good question, right? How do you contend with the seemingly explicit verse that tells us that Teshuva is a mitzvah? So, in other words, how is the Minchas Chinuch's understanding of the Rambam going to deal with this? Kate said Yufarshu as pasuk Yud Aleph HaMitzvah Hazos. How are they going to say this mitzvah? What is it referring to? Ladatam HaMitzvah Hazos ain't a remez just the mitzvah Teshuva. It's just mitzvah Hazos. What's mitzvah? It's not talking about Teshuva. El Muchvanis L'chol mitzvahs L'chlol Kol mitzvahs HaTorah. It's referring to all the mitzvahs of the Torah.
That's like one is Hashem.
Yeah. It's saying, so let me finish the paragraph. We'll discuss. When it says, and you will return, it's not saying, and you must return. It's saying, eventually you're going to come back. It's speaking homiletically. It's not saying, thou shalt return. It's saying, eventually you're going to come back. Or maybe some say it's talking about kibbutz golias. It's the returning of the exiles. You're going to return to Hashem. When it says Ki mitzvah hazos, it doesn't mean specifically that mitzvah. It's talking about mitzvahs in general. Why doesn't it say mitzvahs in general? It should say that's what the other ones are going to say. The Ramban and the Sforno. Wait a minute. If that were the case, it should say Ki haTorah hazos or Ki mitzvos. Why is it in the singular? They think it's referring to one specific mitzvah, which is Teshuva. The Rambam, according to the Minchas Chinuch, no, it's not referring to one specific mitzvah.
That was the Ramban, which is Sforno, and the other.
Correct.
Okay. But,
Correct.
the
The Minchas Chinuch's understanding of his presentation of the Rambam, where it is not an absolute mitzvah, not so bothered by the pasuk, because the pasuk we can explain away homiletically. A mitzvah doesn't mean a mitzvah, it means a mitzvah. So there's an old saying in Yiddish, and they use it in yeshiva a lot. Is you can give like a whole Torah, and somebody will ask one question and like slug up the whole thing. I don't have a way to properly translate the word slug up, but I think you know what I mean. Okay, so there's a saying in Yiddish. It says "Ober von a kasha starben," right? No one ever died from a question. In other words, So you could be a literalist, or you could have a broader understanding of what the Chumash means. And by the way, there are times when we're literalists, but if we were purely literalists all the time, when we read Chumash, we would have a lot of problems. Yeah, we would have a lot of problems. A lot. We have to. Anytime you learn Chumash, you have to have a fair amount of intellectual flexibility. Let's call that. Okay. If you're looking for some interesting, like if you happen to be spending time in the car and you need to listen to stuff, okay, people listen to the radio and you listen to podcasts. It's like a thing, right? podcast. Right? So my wife and I, we took a driving trip this summer. So let's do a lot of things. Koren actually has a podcast series, and they did some really some are really good. And there was one that they interviewed Simi Peters. Do you know who she is? So Simi Peters is a long time educator in Israel. She wrote a book called Learning How to Read Midrash. Phenomenal book with a deep understanding of the relationship of Midrash to Pshat, or she debunks the whole thing, what you call Pshat, literal Pshat. Really interesting. But to get you an understanding of like how you have to kind of open your mind to say that, and by the way, and it's sometimes also deprogram from some of the stuff that we learned, as we were kids over the years, right? Some of the, so I could get myself into trouble, particularly with my wife here, because we argue about this whole time. I don't think that, I know the calculations, but I don't think Rivka was 3 when she got married to Yitzchak. I don't think the whole thing about lifting the stone and maybe it's meant to be taken in an instructive way, not necessarily a literal way. So the question is, how do you juxtapose the two? So she's like really interesting piece that she has, and the other person, Simi Peters, but it's on the Koren series podcast. If you look through them, there's a lot of them. Right. She's actually coming out with a new book eventually. But even her book, Learning to Read Midrash, is really. And the other person on it was Rabbi Nati Helfgott, he's great. He's a good friend. He's a rabbi in a shul in Tina called Netivot. But he teaches in SAR, and he's the head of the Tanakh department at YCT. But he's just like a super guy, and he's he also wrote an unbelievable book, which I have used in our teachings here over the years. It's in Hebrew and English. It's something called Of Mikra and Meaning. Of Mikra and Meaning, mostly focusing on pieces in Bamidbar, but other places as well. Phenomenal parshanut that you could really sink your teeth into. And he discusses this also about teaching to a younger generation about the assimilating midrash and pshat and literal, et cetera. So in other words, if a pasuk says mitzvah, I'm not going to lose sleep over it, kind of thing. But the Rambam will not be too bothered by it. But the Ramban, that's where he parks his trailer on it, right? So in other words, that's a bona fide way of studying. And by the way, it speaks to how, in general, they learn psukim and chumash and different machlokas, et cetera. Okay, let's continue. Hadeya shemitzvos hatshuva eina mitzvah chiyuvis kedei shichas bal minchas chinuch Rambam lo kol maskimim lo. By the way, the fact that the Minchas Chinuch says that this is what the Rambam says, not everybody agrees to this. Again, it's the Minchas Chinuch interpreting what he thinks the Rambam means. Now, you would ask a simple question. Wait a minute. Is this a mitzvah or not? We talked last week about Monei HaMitzvos, people who count mitzvos, people who list the mitzvos. Remember we said we'd lock you up in a room, everybody separately. You're going to have to write 613, 248, 365. Are you going to come up? Everybody's going to come up with a different number, a different list. Wait a minute, who's one of the most famous to write that list? The Rambam himself. The Rambam, what's it called? Sefer HaMitzvos. Like, what are the chances? What a great name.
What he writes there is so ambiguous, what he actually writes.
No. So look at this. So
he doesn't include this in his list.
Well, wouldn't that be a good place to check? That we could know, right? So he says, Shekain HaRambam Atzmo b'Sefer HaMitzvos. The Rambam himself in Sefer HaMitzvos, and if you look in what note is it? It's I have to read the same page. No, note 5, Mitzvah Ayin Gimel, Mitzvah number 73. Okay, he writes, Shetzivanu lehisvados al ha'avonos v'achataim shenemar v'hisvadu es chatasam. Umahi havidui al korcheinu teshuvahi. Right? The Rambam himself says that we are commanded to give vidui, or to give confession, to say confession on all of our sins and our shortcomings, etc., 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 because the pasuk says, "V'hisva duas chatasam," and you have to confess. So umahi avidi. So what is it? So we must say that it's tshuva. V'imtisha lama masker harabam rakas avidu kemitzvah. Wait a minute. If you're going to say, oh, no, the Rambam doesn't mean that tshuva is a mitzvah. The Rambam means vidu is a mitzvah. Why didn't he just write tshuva as a mitzvah? Just categorize and say there's a mitzvah to do tshuva. So why wouldn't he write it like that? So it's only one, vidu is only one part of teshuva. So zeh bir hamabit. Mabit is Rabbi Shai Detrani, one of the Italian from the earlier period of the Acharonim. He ki havidu higamar hatshuva. V'haravam kar la mitzvah tshuva al shem hagamar shala. Tshuva has many steps, and so if you put it together with what the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, the laws of Tshuva, and the Yad HaChazaka, he says first, remember there's multi-steps. First, you have to understand that what you did was wrong. Then you have to have regret. Then you have to commit that you won't do it again. But what's the end of the process is saying it out loud, right? So he says the Rambam calls tshuva based on gemar shala, on its completion or its ending, which is it? Well, I'll finish the paragraph and we'll discuss some of the challenges with this statement as well. In any event, the Rambam writes that vidui is not if you want to do it. He says, no, you have to do it. Shetzivanu, we are commanded to confess, which is why when we say Ashamnu, as we said last week, we're all performing a mitzvah, and that's what we sing because we're so happy to do a mitzvah. And it's not dependent on a person's, I want to do it, I don't want to do it. Mashma kiladata mitzvah hatshuva hi mitzvah. So according to this, again, so it's, I don't know what the chinuch is. The Minchas Chinuch never really addresses what the, not now. We're not looking at that. How does he deal with the Rambam and the Sefer HaMitzvot? So some people say, there's a difference between what the Rambam writes in the Sefer HaMitzvot versus what he writes in the Yad HaChazaka. That's really like, peeling back all the layers here. But just understand that not everybody agrees with this assessment of the Rambam because the Rambam himself lists vidui as a mitzvah and an absolute mitzvah that tzivanu, we are commanded to do so. Okay? You have to say that at some point, tshuva, like when you finish the mitzvah of tshuva, let's say it's a mitzvah.
Well, then at vidui, you finish the confession. That's because it said the gemar is the vidui.
Okay, so right, so wait, so list for me all the steps. It's not in there. Okay, you have charata. Yep, you have to recognize we did wrong. Charata. What else?
Never doing it again.
Committed to never doing it again. Now, maybe that. So maybe, what if you're never tested again?
Between you and Hashem.
It's
not-
not.
it's not-
No.
Tshuva can also be done
Right,
of their own.
Right. No, I'm saying if part of the process is that I know that when I am in that situation, that I won't falter. Yeah, but does that mean that if I'm never challenged with that test again, that I?
But it also means that these can't be the end.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a little bit, because it's like you're on a continuum.
I feel like these are in practice are from the beginning. You sit there and you read these, right? It's very prescribed, and you think about what you've done. That's each one of those things. It's just the natural way you do it. And you probably wouldn't have thought of a lot of those things that you've done wrong, but for the fact that you're sitting reading these and trying to figure out how you checked off each category.
Right. So you're. I mean, I know about you. So I hope that people when you read.
Everybody's checked off every category.
When we daven, I always tell people when we daven, we have the art scroll machzer we use. So you go in the back, right, the back, and then you're looking at this like everybody's like they're kind of like looking around like, how did they know? Like, yeah. We have
So many of them are different versions of Lashon Hara.
we have prattled on endlessly. That's my favorite one. Prattled. It's the only time of the year we get to say prattled. We never get to use the word prattled, not nearly enough. But you're right. Maybe because if Vida is Vida really Gemar HaTshuva? maybe that's just what opens the door. Because maybe when you do that, you're like, oh yeah, forgot about that. Oh yeah, there's that. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. And then has it ever happened that after you've, let's say, expressed vidui, that it awoke within you, like, you know what? I realized that maybe I offended somebody by doing something that I didn't realize it until now. And maybe so it could be that the vidui is haschalas tshuva. I don't know. So that's so you're fully disagreeing with the mabit, which is well within your rights, absolutely. This is just one interpretation, but I'm saying, but it's important to understand that these things work on a continuum. So let's say, I don't know. So we'll give an example that hopefully none of us can relate to. Okay. I'm traveling on the road, and I decide I'm hungry and I'm starving, this and that, and like my temptation gets the better of me. I pull into the drive-through, and I get, here we go again, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, special pickles, onions, and sesame seed bun. Okay, the power of advertising, it's unbelievable, right? Okay, and
My kid last week said, "Where's the beef?" without realizing.
Ah,
what he said.
yeah.
Elon's like, "You have no idea what you just said."
Right.
He pulled it up on YouTube. He was like, "That's not funny." He's like, "Just leave."
Yeah, yeah.
Whole campaign.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's bad.
Do you remember the lady's name? Who was?
I never knew.
Clara Peller.
Yeah, yeah.
Her name was Clara Peller. That old lady in that. So I have a steel trap of a mind for nonsense like you cannot believe. Like you have no idea. You have no idea what's rattling around up there. Nothing good. Okay. So I can whatever. So let's say I do that. And I feel horrible about it. Terrible. And I do tshuva and I my mouth. Okay, what? Only if I was warned by witnesses. And first of all, it's malchus, just lashes. Let's not get crazy, okay? Stoning, you're so quick to get rid of me. That's so nice. But let's say I do tshuva and I go through the whole thing. And then the next, I don't know, a week after Yom Kippur, I'm traveling again, and the same thing happens. And then I succumb. And again, I get the same thing. Is that a new Avera? I mean, it is a new Avera, but does that mean that my tshuva was not complete? Or is that like over and done and this is a new chat? Like, how does that work? I'm not saying I have an answer for you.
I think it also depends on intent again. Like, how pure is your tshuva when you're saying it?
Let's say I meant it at the time. I really, really meant it.
But did you?
Oh, now I need to lie down on the couch.
Been there. All of you know it, and so do I. You're saying it and you're like, I really, really, really want to, I really, really, really know it's wrong. I know that the next time for into this, I should not. And then there you are again.
Right. Well, the problem is that so we maybe I'm such a cynic because I've been doing this a long time, is like, yeah. My favorite story of all time, of my favorite Yom Kippur story. So where when I was a rabbi in Long Island, so the way that they smushed everybody into the shul at one time before we had to like really go to different services is, so there was an elevated bima and it was a cathedral style. So it was one row down the center, men's section, the mechitza, and women's section on the outer flanks. But the women's section would come, they would put a mechitza, was almost like all the way next to where I'm sitting, right? I'm elevated. So I like, and I heard when I'm up there on the bima and I could hear a lot of, conversations, heard a lot of things. So my favorite conversation is, it's a word that I never learned until I was in the rabbinate, the word breakfast. I didn't know such a thing, breakfast. Like it's like a chavaya, it's like a thing. Who'd you get invited to? Where are you going? What are you serving it? So 2 women are having a conversation about breakfast. And this is like not even like halfway through Musaf and Yom Kippur. Conversation of breakfast. We'll go to a place, if you know the 5 towns, we'll go to a place called Mother Kelly's.
Seriously?
It's like the greatest, Italian, like where there's like a thing, and I'm thinking like, so I had to learn how do you manage it, how do you deal with that, like in my own mind. So if you could engage in tshuva, but you're really not doing anything, or you could seriously engage in it, and then you come up with challenges, right? So going back to the model of tshuva as recovery, anybody who struggles with any form of addiction, will tell you, or if you read about it, you're never cured.
Mm.
You're never okay. You just have to go one day at a time, fighting and saying, like, here's another day, and the challenge is constant because you could relapse or re-engage, whatever it is at any moment. So that if we look at it in that sense, yeah, tshuva's hard. So if I had another cheeseburger afterwards, does that mean that my first tshuva? No, maybe it was. I actually even had somebody before me, people love to tell other people, like when they're doing other things wrong, it's the Jew's favorite activity is telling another Jew they're doing something wrong. That's like our favorite pastime. Okay. So I don't know, I was officiating a wedding once years and years ago, and somebody felt that one of the witnesses wasn't so which is, it's always an issue. So somebody says to me, you know what, before he walks up, tell him that at that moment, do tshuva at that moment, and then he'll be pure. I'm like, okay, so for 5 minutes he's good, and then like not, it's a funny thing, but does that work? It's like, and I say this all the time, every year, or more than one time a year around this time of year, somebody comes to you on, the after Yom Kippur, the day after, how's your Yom Kippur? Oh, it was amazing. It was great. It was uplifting. Ask the other guy, how's your Yom Kippur? How's my Yom Kippur? I don't know. Ask me on Hanukkah how my Yom Kippur was.
My husband always says, I know last year's was success.
Right, right. Because how do I know? Did it work? Did it take? Right? Did it work? So lots of these kind of, and when you really start to think about it, you start getting your, like, it's kind of like, I think about, like, if your decree was written now on Rosh Hashanah, it's written, on Yom Kippur, it's sealed, right? So let's say a person dies on like Erev Rosh Hashanah, is that good or bad? If a person dies like the day after Yom Kippur, is that good or bad? Like how these, but let's say you already had the illness. Does that mean that it was starting to be written before? And like, this is like Back to the Future, blow your mind kind of stuff, like when you start to really think about when Marty McFly comes back to the parking lot and he sees himself running away like that, like, whoa, any time travel movies, forget it. It's like, don't even start. Okay. And there are many, and you can drive yourself crazy. So it's these types of things, but what is happening at Teshuva? What I do know, whether you believe that it is a mitzvah that's absolute, or whether it is a mitzvah that if you choose to engage in or not, everybody will agree there's some sort of fulfillment, but that may or may not be the reason why a person should engage in it. Now, some say, why would he says later in the piece, which we're not going to get to, please feel free to work through it. But maybe the reason why it's put in the category of a mitzvah is sort of an incentive or an inspiration for us to engage in the process. Because ultimately, like, really, who wants to do the work?
Shouldn't part of the process be a plan so that if you do drive by and want your burger, that you're not gonna eat something?
So is it better to avoid it, or is it better to take it head on and say, I'm not going to do it? Well, it depends. It depends on the person.
I'm just saying, I think if someone's doing tshuva, part of the tshuva should be a plan. Okay, so next time I drive down that way, I'm gonna drive a different way. I want to listen to, my Torah on tape at the same time. So maybe like as I'm listening to the rabbi, I'm gonna feel like I can't go, whatever. So I think I'm just saying, I think that should be part of tshuva.
And that's you're exactly right, which is part of Kabbalah al Ha'asid. When you make an acceptance on the future, part of acceptance on the future is trying to strategize and say, how am I not going to fall into the same trap? So what we said last week is that, so tshuva doesn't change what happens, tshuva changes you. Tshuva changes you so that you become a different person. You drive a different way. You take a different route. You take a different path in life. And my favorite, I'm gonna, I was tasked, they asked me to speak to high school next week. Okay. Maybe you have kids in Christian, you have kids? No, Christian, right? So, right. Oh, right. So they're like thinking like, okay, so how's it possible for an entire period I'm supposed to talk to, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, some of them are my children and nieces, that they're going to actually be interested in it. I'll figure it out. But, believe me, that's much harder than speaking to a whole congregation for a Kol Nidre. Much, much harder. Much, much harder. And one of the things that I have always loved, and I think this is such an important lesson. If we get nothing out of what we did the last 2 weeks, but this, I promise you it's worth it. Okay. So the Gemara says, in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, and two different dapim, the same, like one page later, they different stories like Hanina ben Tradion. You know the story of Hanina ben Tradion, and he's being tortured, and the guy's wrapping him in the Sefer Torah, and then the students are saying, like, Rebbe, what do you see? Like, of course, there's always the annoying students. The rabbi's like burning to death, and they're like, Rebbe, what's going on? Like, shut up. Okay. So like it's so typical in the Gemara. And then the executioner like starts to feel bad, and he's like, well, wow. He's like, do you see the letters floating in the air? He's like, is there hope for me? And the guy's like, yeah, there is. So he takes the sponge off of his heart to hasten his death, and he jumps in with him, and then a heavenly voice comes and says, some can acquire the world to come in an instant. Now, it's such a great story. Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, he teaches Torah his whole life. He's working, gets tortured to death. And this guy jumps in and he gets Olam Haba in 1 second. What does that mean, B'Shah Achas? So my Rebbe always told us is that if you look back at one of the original stories in the Chumash of Cain and Abel, he brings his offering. What does it say to Cain? It says, Ve'el Cain ve'el minchaso lo sha'a. That's the word. What does that mean there, though? But to Cain and to his offering, lo sha'a, God did not turn. The word sha'a means like to give your attention, to turn to. So we say like this: Yesh shekonam olam haba b'sha'a achas. You want to get olam haba? All you have to do is make one turn. Because if you're heading a certain way, you're on a trajectory. And if you change your angle just slightly, your whole trajectory is different. Everything changes. Imagine if you go this, and you could measure in your life that had I taken this job, had I married that person, had I gone to this school, had I bum. I mean, all the people in the world, who have, we just had the 9/11. How many 9/11? I have a friend, a close friend of mine. He was my roommate in Israel, who was supposed to be on. He was in Boston. And he was supposed to be on one of the planes, but his thing got canceled, so he left the night before. But he had a ticket for that plane, right? And every single day he talks about, like, I shouldn't be here, but I'm here. So that's the whole yesh shekonam. How do you get olam haba? It's not going to happen in an instant. There's no like, automatic. You're going to get in. No. Again, the story of the Gemara is meant to teach us something. Shah achas. You want to get olam haba? You have to start with one turn, one pivot. You pivot just a little bit. You change your whole direction, your whole trajectory. That's how you get olam haba. That's tshuva. Tshuva is not, if you try to embrace tshuva as the massive, all-encompassing, I'm going to be perfect, you're going to be let down. You're going to be disappointed. And I'm not saying you shouldn't try. We should try and do the best that we can, but you also have to be realistic with yourself and say, you know what? I know that, if I don't keep Shabbos, let's say. Now, of course, halavai, everybody should keep Shabbos. But if I don't keep Shabbos, let me at least try and say, like, all right, I'm going to start with Friday night. I'm going to start Friday night. I won't drive. Friday night, I won't use my phone. Friday night, I'm going to just go to something like that. And you say, tafasta meruba lo tafasta. If I try to do too much, you haven't done anything. So tshuva is a process. Tshuva is directional. Tshuva is, and the reason why we put it in the mitzvah category is because if you also feel like I've accomplished something, I've done a mitzvah, I have fulfilled the will of God by actually working on myself, by trying to engage in the process of self-betterment, of trying to say, I want to be closer to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I really do mean it when I say it. Saying it and executing are two different things, but I really want to. I really, really, really want to. And that's why when we say Hashem Karacham L'chanan, which we've discussed here before, the 13 midas Arachamim, right? If we had to leave one of them out, we would leave out emes. Emes. That's the last thing we want to talk to God about is emes, truth. God knows the truth about us. We're trying to move away from that. We don't want God to see the truth about us. So what's the emes? The emes is God says, like when you pull away all the layers, all the stuff that gets in our way, deep down who I really am, what I want to be. That's emes. That's what we ask. God, see the real me. The real me wants to do the right thing. And if we want to do the right thing, then God willing will be zocheh to Teshuva Shlema. So that's the this in a nutshell. Again, if you have time, if you can, to learn the rest of this over Yom Tov, I would highly, highly recommend it. God willing, we should all be written and sealed in the book of life, and looking forward to a great year of Torah study ahead again. So just a reminder that next time when we meet is like, I don't know, like Hanukkah, because Tuesday, that's 4 Tuesdays that we lose. Right? Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres. So after that, God willing, and then I have to figure out like what my conference, everything schedule is, whatever. But we're going to start Mirta Shambly Nether Sefer Yehoshua. So if you have a Tanakh or if you have an independent volume like this, we're gonna dig into it, and I'm sure it'll be like 5 weeks of introduction before we open the pasuk, or maybe not. I don't know. But maps and timelines are always welcome. So again, have a great Ksivach Simatova, good Yantif, and I'll see you all then.
Thank you.